Hey everybody, Chad here. Hopefully you're doing well. Hopefully you had a great 4th of July. I tell you, I'm really looking forward to not having to. I'm looking forward to a time when we can teach together in a room again, as opposed to by the video. This is not my forte necessarily to talk into this camera, but it's what we got to do right now. So here we go. So we're going to be starting a series. It's titled "Knowing God," specifically Jesus, and the lesson I was given today, the title was "The World's Most Famous Man." And now, when I started thinking about that idea, I realized I never really um, thought about Jesus as the world's most famous man. And I think the reason is, I think of actors as famous. I think of sports people and musicians as famous. And to be famous is to be well known. Like some people have talents and do stuff, but other people are famous just, I don't know, because they just happen to be at the right place in the right time. And people, Jesus is, I think, so much more than famous, like so much more than just being well known. And so I think that's why I never really thought about Jesus as the most famous person who ever lived. If you type that into the internet, who's the most famous person who ever lived, um, it'll generate lists, and most lists said Jesus is number one. And if not as number one, he's usually number within the top five for sure. So everyone pretty much says Jesus is the most famous person. But like I said, I never really thought about him as the most famous person because I think about him as so much more. And I was thinking a word that I think I would have maybe used to describe him as Jesus, the most influential man that ever lived. And because if you think about Jesus and all that he did in his life, and think about our lives now, there are so many areas that have been influenced and touched by Jesus. Like, it's actually hard for me to think of areas that aren't somehow influenced by Jesus and his teachings and who he was. While I was thinking about looking into Jesus as the most influential man, again, I put it into the computer and it, generated lists and who was the most influential person who ever lived. And Jesus was on the top of, of pretty much all the lists. And I found a quote by a historian here, this guy named Philip Schaff. He's a historian. He said this about Jesus, and just listen to the impact of Jesus according to him. This Jesus of Nazareth, without money and arms, conquered more millions than Alexander, Caesar, Mohammed, and Napoleon. Without science, he shed more light on things human and divine than all philosophers and scholars combined. Without the eloquence of schools, he spoke such words of life as were never spoken before or since, and produced effects which lie beyond the reaches of orators or poets. Without writing a single line, he set more pens in motion and furnished themes for more sermons, orations, discussions, learned volumes, works of art, and songs of praise than the whole army of great men of ancient and modern times. The life of, so that's what this guy said. I mean, basically, he's saying the life of Jesus has affected more things than all of the great men of that have been or are. Like, Jesus' life did more than anybody. And to think about who Jesus was from a human point, like Jesus was like occupationally, he was a carpenter, which of course, great things can come from carpenters and construction guys. Like, I know that's true, but he wasn't like an emperor. He wasn't like a general. He wasn't, he was a carpenter. He wasn't living even in the central, like in the day he lived, he wasn't even in like the most exciting metropolitan area. He was in, he was in smaller towns. So why would Jesus have such an influence? Like, could a mere man have such an influence? And I would say no. A mere man could not have such an influence, but Jesus was not a mere man. Jesus is God. Um, Jesus is is the Son part of the Trinity. If you're an eighth grader, remember we studied the Trinity, and the Trinity is made up of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and Jesus is the Son. The three in one. God is made of three parts, but he's one, and Jesus is the Son of God, and he is God. And that is how he could influence the world in such a way that 2,000 years after his death, his influence is gone on, and he is the most famous person who ever lived, but he is also the most influential person who ever lived, and he's influenced so many aspects of our life. And that's what I want you guys to think about today is, how has Jesus influenced your life? How has Jesus influenced your family's life? We're just coming off the 4th of July. So how has Jesus influenced our country? Our country was founded on Christian principles. In our founding, in the documents, there are Christian principles in there. So I want you to think about Jesus. How has he influenced our world? And I just want to close by saying, our world is in a crazy place right now, and it needs the influence of Jesus. People are trying to remove the influence of Jesus from the world, from our country, and I think that is the worst thing to do. Like now with, whether it be in relation to the riots or relation to the virus, we need the influence of Jesus in our lives and in our country more than ever. And so as we take time over the next weeks to learn more about Jesus, hopefully you all grow closer to him and get to know him better, and then take what you know about him and you take, if we're calling ourselves Christians, we're to be imitators of Christ, and hopefully we're taking that into our world, into our country, and we can make a difference during this time when I think our country and our world need it more than ever. So hopefully enjoy looking into the influence of Jesus and thinking about his influence on your life, and hopefully you're all doing well, and hopefully we'll see you all at church soon. Thanks. Bye.